There I was, standing and watching as my wife walked out of the back exit of the hotel where she worked and got into a car with a face I knew all too well. But it wasn't familiar because it was someone I knew personally. It was familiar because it belonged to a famous person. The man behind the wheel was one of the biggest stars in the country. His name and face splashed across billboards, magazines, and television. He leaned forward just enough for the dim light of the alley to illuminate his unmistakable profile. Impeta. This is the story of how I learned my wife was cheating on me with one of the most famous men in the world. This is a story that's hard to believe. One that uncovered countless secrets, changed the lives of many people, and opened my eyes to just how unfair and unpredictable this world can be. And it's a story of genius revenge. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have told you Claire was the best thing that ever happened to me. She had a way of lighting up a room, effortlessly drawing people in with her charm and kindness. She was stunning, too, not in a flashy, showy way, but in the kind of way that made you feel lucky just to stand beside her. Claire worked as a receptionist at one of the nicest hotels in the city. She always said she loved her job for its routine simplicity. It's nothing glamorous, she'd tell me with that warm, self-deprecating smile of hers. But it suits me, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We built our life around what I thought was mutual trust and understanding. I worked long hours at my job in tech, knowing she had the flexibility to pick up the slack at home. I never complained when she worked late shifts or volunteered to stay back to cover for a coworker. That was Claire, dependable, selfless, perfect. Our marriage felt solid, the kind of foundation you could build dreams on. I supported her unconditionally, made sure she had everything she needed. When she got a raise, we celebrated like she'd been promoted to CEO. When she came home late, I had dinner waiting. I told myself we were a team, partners in every sense of the word. I never saw the cracks forming. Looking back now, I see how blind I was, how much I wanted to believe in the life we'd created. Claire had a way of making you feel like she was exactly where she wanted to be, like she couldn't imagine a life outside the one we shared. But it was all a lie. The Claire I thought I knew, the devoted wife, the modest hotel receptionist, was nothing more than an illusion. It's funny, isn't it? You always think you'd see the signs, that you'd know if something was off. But when it happens to you, it's like your brain works overtime trying to justify it, trying to keep the picture perfect. Yeah, I know it sounds like your typical story about betrayal, but honestly, that's how they all start. You think it could never happen to you until it does. First, it was little things. Claire started working late more often than usual. The hotel's understaffed, she'd say with a tired smile, and I'd nod along. It made sense, right? The hospitality industry wasn't exactly thriving, and Claire had always been the kind of person who'd step up when others wouldn't. Then there were the clothes. She'd never been one for flashy outfits. Her wardrobe was simple, practical. But suddenly, there were new pieces creeping in. Expensive ones. High heels, sleek dresses, designer handbags. I joked about it once, saying, I didn't realize receptionist work came with a dress code upgrade. And she just laughed it off, claiming she wanted to treat herself. She seemed distracted at home, too. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd give me these short, clipped answers, like she was only half listening. I thought it was stress. I wanted it to be stress. Still, there was something in her smile that felt different, like she wasn't really there when she looked at me, like I'd become background noise in her life. And yet, I didn't question it. Not really. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. People get busy. They go through phases. That's just marriage, right? Except it wasn't. Not this time. It happened during one of those routine dinners. You know, the kind you have with old friends to catch up, laugh about the past, and pretend like your life isn't quietly unraveling. Claire and I were at a cozy little bistro with a couple of her coworkers. A last-minute get-together she'd insisted on attending. I was halfway through a plate of pasta when I caught the shift in tone. Claire and one of her colleagues, a woman named Megan, were leaning in close, laughing about something just out of earshot. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Megan was bubbly, a little over the top, and always seemed to bring out Claire's livelier side. But then I heard Megan's voice drop to a teasing murmur. So, How many special guests did you have to keep entertained this week? Claire shot her a sharp look and said something in return, too low for me to catch. But Megan just laughed, brushing it off like it was some harmless joke. That's when it happened. Claire glanced at me, just for a second, and the smile on her face faltered. It was brief, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Special guests, I asked, trying to keep my tone casual as I sipped my drink. Megan waved a hand dismissively. Oh, just hotel stuff. VIPs can be so demanding, right, Claire? Claire nodded, her smile too tight, too practiced. Yeah, nothing interesting. I let it go, or at least I pretended to. The conversation moved on. The night carried forward, but the words stuck with me. Special guests. It didn't mean anything, yet it felt like it meant everything. Seeds of doubt don't grow overnight. They fester quietly, taking root in the back of your mind, feeding off every odd look, every late night, every forced smile. By the time we got home that night, my unease was impossible to ignore. It was a Tuesday morning when I found it. I was heading out to grab some groceries, and Claire had left her car blocking mine in the driveway. She was at work, and I didn't feel like waiting, so I grabbed her keys and moved it myself. The moment I slid into the driver's seat, something caught my eye. A corner of fabric poked out from under a pile of gym clothes in the back seat. A bright, unmistakable blue. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached back, pulled it free, and there it was, a signed sports jersey. Not just any jersey. The kind collectors would kill for, with the signature of one of the biggest athletes in the country sprawled across the chest. I stared at it, my mind racing. Why the hell was this in Claire's car? When she got home that night, I brought it up casually, holding the jersey up like I discovered some buried treasure. What's this? Her reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath before she smoothed her expression into something neutral. Oh, just a gift from a guest at the hotel. He was really nice and insisted I take it. One of those VIP types. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something about the way she said it, too rehearsed, too dismissive. Like she was trying to shut the conversation down before it could go anywhere. Oh, I said, forcing a smile. Nice of him. She nodded, already turning away. Yeah, people like that are generous sometimes. No big deal. No big deal. I couldn't shake the unease as the jersey sat on the kitchen counter, glaring at me like a neon sign I couldn't ignore. Something didn't add up. VIP guests didn't hand out signed jerseys like party favors, and Claire's explanation felt too thin to hold weight. So I started digging. I went online, searching the athlete's name, cross-referencing it with mentions of our city, the hotel, anything I could find. It didn't take long to piece together the pattern. He was a regular in town during his competition season. He always stayed at Claire's hotel. And suddenly, Claire's late nights, her distractions, her wardrobe changes, they all started to make a twisted kind of sense. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had more. But the jersey? It was no longer just a piece of sports memorabilia. It was the first piece of a puzzle I couldn't stop myself from assembling. It was almost midnight when Claire texted to say she'd be working late again. Another late shift. Another VIP client needing extra attention. Don't wait up, she added. Her words as casual as ever. Except I wasn't planning to wait up. I've been sitting with this knot in my stomach for weeks now. The kind of unease that doesn't let you sleep. Her explanations no longer felt plausible, and the jersey had been the final straw. So I decided to find out for myself. I parked down the street from the hotel, hidden in the shadows of a side alley. The rain had started earlier in the evening, the kind of steady drizzle that blurred the city lights and soaked into your bones. I kept my hood up, trying to blend into the dark as I watched the entrance. For hours, nothing happened. Staff came and went, a few guests filtered in, and the lobby lights glowed warmly through the glass doors. I was starting to think I'd overplayed my hand when, just after 1 a.m., the back door of the hotel swung open. It was Claire. She stepped out into the alley, her hair pulled back loosely, her coat clutched tight against the rain. Her expression was different. Not tired, not stressed, but alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. And then the car pulled up. Sleek, black, unmistakably expensive. The kind of car that didn't belong in an alley but on a red carpet. The window rolled down just enough for the driver to lean forward, his face illuminated briefly by the glow of the dashboard. And that's when I saw him, the athlete. I recognized him instantly. It wasn't just the face from billboards and magazines. It was the confidence, the casual arrogance in the way he waited, like the whole world revolved around him. Claire didn't hesitate. She climbed into the passenger seat, the door clicking shut behind her, and the car pulled away without so much as a glance in my direction. I stood frozen in the rain, my heart pounding as reality hit me like a freight train. My wife was cheating on me, not just with anyone, but with one of the most famous men in the world. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and snapped a few photos as the car disappeared into the night. Proof. That's what I needed now. Proof of what I'd seen. Proof of what I already knew but still didn't want to believe. The rain soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone, but I didn't feel it. My mind was racing, my thoughts spiraling into dark places I wasn't ready to face. Claire's betrayal wasn't just a crack in our marriage. It was a chasm, and I knew there was no coming back from this. I spent the rest of the night staring at those photos, the light from my phone casting shadows across the walls of our bedroom. My mind churned with questions, anger simmering just beneath the surface. By morning, I knew what I had to do. Claire came home a little after 9 a.m., looking fresh-faced despite her late shift. She kissed me on the cheek, dropped her bag by the door, and started making coffee, like it was just another day. I didn't waste time. I pulled the photos up on my phone and set it on the kitchen counter in front of her. "What's this?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She froze mid-pour, the coffee pot trembling slightly in her hand. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for a moment, I saw something: panic, guilt, maybe even fear. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a practiced neutrality. She set the pot down and let out a long sigh, like she was the one who had been wronged. "Pete, it's not what you think," she began, her tone measured, almost condescending. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what I think." Her shoulders squared and she finally met my gaze. "Okay, fine," she said, shrugging like she'd been caught breaking a minor rule. "It happened, but it's not a big deal. You're making it into something it's not." I stared at her, the words barely registering. "Not a big deal? Claire, you've been sneaking around with—" I stopped myself. "You've been sneaking around. How is that not a big deal?" She rolled her eyes. "Look, Pete, these VIPs, they expect a certain level of attention. It's part of the job. You know how demanding they can be. He wanted something, and She hesitated, then shrugged again. "I gave it to him. It's not like it means anything. I didn't want to name him, not even in my own head. And I'm not going to name him for you either. But let's be honest, if you're curious enough, you'll find out. His face is everywhere, his arrogance impossible to miss." I leaned back against the counter, struggling to keep my composure. "You're telling me this is just normal for you? It's not like I'm the only one," she snapped, her voice rising slightly. "Do you have any idea how many people would kill to be in my position? It's a perk, Pete. A harmless fling. You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word hit me like a slap. My wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted, was standing in front of me, diminishing everything we'd built together into some twisted idea of a professional benefit. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand an apology that I knew wouldn't come. But instead I stayed calm. My silence, I think, unnerved her more than any shouting match ever could. "You're unbelievable," I said finally, my voice low and steady. "Do you even hear yourself?" She crossed her arms, defiance etched into every line of her face. "I don't see why you're making this about us. It has nothing to do with you." And that was it. That was the moment I knew Claire wasn't just unfaithful. She was unapologetic. The anger burned hot inside me, but I forced it down. Let her think she'd won. Let her believe I'd let this go. Because I wasn't going to yell or beg or plead. I was going to do something much worse. When Claire left for work the next morning, as if nothing had happened, I sat in the quiet of the house, staring at my laptop. The confrontation from the night before played on a loop in my head, her dismissive tone, her complete lack of remorse. But what burned more than anything was the smug satisfaction she'd worn, as if she'd convinced herself this was normal, excusable, even justified. No, I wasn't going to let her or him get away with this. I started digging. It wasn't hard to find breadcrumbs. People love to gossip, especially about the rich and famous. And this guy was no exception. His name was all over online forums and social media threads. There were whispers of his frequent trips to different cities, always coinciding with competitions or promotional events. And with those trips came stories. Women who had been charmed by his fame, seduced by his power, and discarded just as quickly. He wasn't subtle about it either. Photos of him partying in nightclubs, draped over women half his age, were sprinkled across fan sites. Comments like, "He's such a player," or "Lucky girls, right?" made my stomach turn. I even stumbled upon a thread where someone had compiled a list of alleged affairs, with dates and locations. And wouldn't you know it, his name appeared in our city on multiple occasions. Each visit coincided with Claire's late nights and shifts covering VIP guests. This wasn't a one-off fling. This was a pattern. The more I uncovered, the more my anger morphed into something colder, sharper. This man treated women like accessories, collecting them as casually as his trophies. And Claire? She wasn't even a person to him. She was just another conquest, another notch on his belt. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. My initial reaction had been disbelief, then rage. But now something else settled in its place, resolve. I didn't just want to hurt him, I wanted to destroy him. But to do that, I needed to be smart, careful, deliberate. This wasn't about lashing out in the heat of the moment. It was about precision, about dismantling his image piece by piece. I started taking notes, screenshots, anything I could find that connected him to Claire or painted a picture of his behavior. My phone buzzed at one point, a message from Claire saying she'd be home late again. I didn't reply. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control. Not over her, she was already a lost cause, but over the situation. This wasn't just about Claire's betrayal anymore. It was about him, about exposing the facade he hid behind, and making sure he paid for the arrogance and entitlement that had allowed him to wreck lives without consequence. Let him think he's untouchable. Let him bask in his fame a little longer. He wouldn't see me coming. It's amazing how quickly you can find someone who wants dirt on a celebrity. A few hours of research led me to the perfect candidate, a tabloid journalist named Mia, known for her relentless exposés on the rich and powerful. She had a reputation for being thorough, the kind of reporter who wouldn't print anything without airtight evidence. That's exactly what I needed. I reached out anonymously through an encrypted email. My message was short, vague enough to protect myself but tantalizing enough to grab her attention. I have proof of one of the country's biggest sports stars engaging in questionable behavior. This includes photos, timestamps, and corroborated details of multiple affairs with women in different cities. If you're interested, reply to this email. Confidentiality is a must. Her response came within the hour. She was interested, more than interested. We arranged to speak through a secure channel and I laid out the bait. I didn't mention Claire by name, not yet. Instead, I started with the photos I'd taken of him picking her up from the hotel. I also shared a few screenshots from fan forums, piecing together his pattern of behavior. But I saved the ace up my sleeve for last. The intimate photos. Those were the most damning. I'd found them buried in Claire's phone the night after our confrontation. She'd left it unlocked on the kitchen counter, and curiosity got the better of me. In her gallery, there were messages and photos he'd sent her, graphic, explicit, and undeniably him. The selfies alone were enough to destroy his carefully crafted public image. When I shared these with Mia, she was silent for a long moment before finally saying, This is the kind of story that ends careers. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, I replied, my voice cold and steady. But it has to be done right. Every detail needs to be verified. If there's any doubt about its authenticity, it'll blow up in both of our faces. She agreed, her professionalism apparent even through the encrypted call. We worked together to corroborate everything. She traced the athlete's travel schedule, matching it to the dates and locations of the photos. She dug into his social media accounts, cross-referencing posts and tagged photos to place him in the exact spots where his indiscretions had occurred. Mia also reached out to a few women from the forums I'd shown her. Several agreed to speak on the condition of anonymity, sharing stories that echoed Claire's. Late-night rendezvous, empty promises, and a complete lack of regard for their dignity once he was done with them. With every new piece of evidence, the story became stronger. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a pattern of predatory behavior that would shatter the image he'd spent years building. And the best part? My name never came up. Mia respected my anonymity, focusing the story entirely on him. Claire was mentioned only briefly, as one of many women caught in his web. When the article was ready, Mia sent me a draft. The headline alone made my blood hum with satisfaction. Star athlete's double life. Affairs, scandals, and the truth behind the fame. I approved it, knowing it was only a matter of time before the world saw him for what he really was. As for Claire, she had no idea what was coming. The story hit the tabloids like a bomb. Overnight, every major news outlet was running headlines about the star athlete's scandalous double life. Photos, quotes from anonymous sources, and detailed timelines painted a picture of a man whose charm had masked years of predatory behavior. He didn't deny it at first. How could he? The photos were undeniable, intimate, explicit, and utterly damning. The media devoured the story, each outlet eager to add its own spin. His sponsors began issuing statements of concern and disappointment, while fans flooded social media with outrage. But the real twist came when Claire's name was leaked. I hadn't intended for that to happen. Mia had kept her name out of the article, true to her word, but the internet has a way of connecting dots once the floodgates open. A few eagle-eyed fans noticed Claire in the background of photos from events, always near him, always discreet. Before long, someone posted her name and workplace, and the narrative shifted. At first, it was just whispers, mentions in comment threads and forums. Then the mainstream media picked it up. Suddenly, Claire wasn't just an unnamed fling. She was one of many. The humiliation was public and merciless. Her face was plastered across websites and news segments, alongside captions like, "The woman behind the scandal," or just another name on the list. That was the cruelest part. The story didn't elevate her to some position of importance. It reduced her to a footnote. The narrative wasn't about her betrayal or their affair. It was about how unremarkable she was in the grand scheme of his conquests. I thought I'd feel some satisfaction seeing her dragged into the mess she'd helped create. And maybe, for a moment, I did. But mostly I just felt empty. Her workplace was inundated with calls from reporters and angry fans. The hotel had no choice but to release a statement distancing themselves from her, which was corporate speak for firing her on the spot. She came home that night in tears, her face pale and her hands trembling. "How could this happen?" she asked me, her voice raw with panic. How could they know? I didn't answer. I just watched her crumble, a small part of me wondering if she'd finally realized the gravity of what she'd done. But she didn't. Instead, she lashed out. "This is your fault, isn't it?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You couldn't handle the truth, so you ruined my life." I stayed calm, refusing to rise to the bait. "You ruined your life, Claire. I just gave the world a look at the truth." She stared at me, speechless, before storming out of the room. I didn't follow her. There was nothing left to say. As for the athlete, his unraveling was even more spectacular. Press conferences devolved into chaos as reporters hounded him with questions about his behavior. His sponsors dropped him one by one, and his team issued a carefully worded statement that essentially ended his career. The fallout was brutal and unrelenting. He wasn't just a disgraced celebrity. He was a cautionary tale, a living example of how quickly power and fame can be stripped away. And I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, knowing that I'd set the wheels in motion. The media frenzy was just the beginning. Watching the athlete's world crumble wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted to ensure that every bridge he had left was burned to the ground. I began leaking additional details to his sponsors, stakeholders, and any other influential contacts I could identify. Through anonymous emails and carefully curated packets of evidence, I provided explicit timelines, corroborating photos, and even a list of the women whose stories Mia hadn't included in her article. I wasn't careless. Each new leak was deliberate, timed to hit him just as the initial wave of outrage started to wane. Every time it seemed like he might weather the storm, another scandal emerged, reigniting public outrage. His sponsors scrambled to cut ties, issuing statements about their commitment to integrity and their decision to terminate their partnerships with him. His team, already distancing themselves, announced that his contract was being reviewed. It wasn't long before they quietly let him go. He was toxic now. No brand, team, or public figure wanted to be associated with him. And while the world was fixated on his downfall, I was turning my attention back to Claire. She was unraveling too, though in a much quieter way. She spent her days locked in the bedroom, fielding calls from reporters and ignoring the flood of hate messages that had taken over her social media. She'd stopped going out, stopped pretending everything was fine. And so did I. I began quietly withdrawing from her life, emotionally, financially, and physically. I stopped asking her how she was doing, stopped leaving dinner for her when she came home late, stopped pretending I cared about what she had to say. I met with a lawyer, combing through our finances and ensuring everything was in order. I opened a new bank account in my name alone, transferring funds and documenting every step to ensure there'd be no surprises later. I wasn't going to confront her again. That part of me was done. Instead, I was going to finish this the way I'd started, with precision. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I made my move. I waited until Claire left for her new job, some office temp position she'd managed to scrape together after weeks of rejection, and headed to her workplace with the divorce papers in hand. This wasn't going to be a quiet, private matter. She'd humiliated me publicly, and now it was her turn. When I arrived, I handed the papers to the receptionist, who looked at me with wide eyes. "These are for Claire," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. "Please make sure she gets them." Then I left. I didn't need to see her reaction. I could imagine it well enough. But the fallout reached me soon enough. Claire called me that evening, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "It's exactly what it looks like," I replied, my tone calm. "I filed for divorce. You served me at work? In front of everyone." "Yes," I said simply. "And if you take a closer look, you'll see that I've included a list of every date he visited our city, every receipt you tried to hide, and every damning detail I could find. Consider it my goodbye gift." She was silent for a moment, and then her voice broke. "You've been planning this, haven't you? All of this. You set me up." I didn't deny it. "I didn't set you up, Claire. You did that to yourself. I just made sure the truth came out." She started to sob, a mix of anger and desperation that didn't move me in the slightest. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "I already have," I said, and hung up. By the time the divorce papers were served, Claire and I were no longer under the same roof. The house was mine. I'd bought it before we were married, every cent paid for with my own hard work. So when things began to fall apart, I made it clear she had no right to stay. She moved out quietly, taking only what she could carry. Her temporary apartment was a far cry from the life she'd once shared with me, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Still, I wasn't finished. Claire's new job at the temp agency had been her only lifeline since the scandal broke. I knew it wasn't much, but it gave her a shred of stability, a sense that she could still rebuild. I couldn't let that happen, not yet. Through an anonymous email, I sent her employer a detailed account of her unprofessional conduct at the hotel. I included the timeline of her affair, her involvement with a client on company property, and the fact that her actions had brought massive negative publicity to her previous workplace. It didn't take long for the hammer to drop. 2 weeks later, she was fired. No severance, no references, nothing. Her reputation in tatters, she was now entirely on her own. She called me once after it happened, her voice shaking with rage. "Why are you doing this to me? Haven't you done enough?" I didn't even bother responding. I just hung up. I wasn't interested in her excuses, her blame-shifting, or her endless attempts to rewrite the narrative. She'd made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. I walked away, leaving her to deal with the ruins of her life. I didn't look back. The house is quiet now, quieter than it's been in years. I thought I'd feel victorious when it was all over, when the athlete's career was destroyed, when Claire was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered reputation. But the truth is, I mostly just felt tired. I sat in the living room one night, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the photos on the mantel. Most of them were of better times, vacations, holidays, memories that used to bring me comfort. Now, they felt like relics of a life that wasn't mine anymore. The pain was real and it still lingered, but something else had taken its place, something quieter, steadier, a sense of clarity. Claire's betrayal had gutted me, no question about it. But it also forced me to see things I'd ignored for too long. About her, about myself, about the life we'd built that wasn't as perfect as I'd let myself believe. Revenge wasn't about closure. It wasn't about fixing the past or erasing the pain. It was about taking back control, reclaiming the part of me that felt lost when I saw her step into that car. And I did. Now it's about moving forward. For the first time in years, I'm focusing on what I want. My career, my friends, my future. The scars are still there, but they don't weigh me down the way they used to. I don't know where Claire is now, and I don't care to find out. Her story ended the moment I walked away. As for me, my story's just beginning.